All right. Okay, now we're going to look at universalism and particularism. And it's not an overly complex topic to be able to explain. The framing of rules and the extent to which they apply to all. The universalist approach says all rules apply equally to all people at all times, unless you're an American. The particularist says all rules apply uniquely in each situation depending on a variety of contextual factors. The social status of the violator, the circumstances of the violation. We've talked about cheating in classroom exams in China and how that can be framed differently if you're helping your roommate and your in-group status is at stake. You've got more space for cheating then. Mood or other circumstantial framing of those with power to judge. So Justin, you'll now be on video the rest of your life, and that will be a cool thing. Comparison, the universalist approach, rules apply equally to all people, all times, all circumstances, because what is right is always right. One of the ways we have learned how to evaluate moral reasoning is to put case studies in front of people. A well-known one is a cure for cancer is available. The pharmacist has it, but it's prohibitively expensive. Your wife has the form of cancer that this treatment works for. Do you break into the pharmacy overnight and steal it, or do you let your wife die? And putting people into dilemmas like that and asking them what are the rules in that situation. Is a human life, your wife's life, in fact, more valuable to you than the rule of law? And I know a lot of husbands who would say, yeah, I will do that, and if I get caught, I will go to jail. But if it means my wife lives, that's worth the price that I'm going to pay for that. The Universalist rule then says every violation should be treated equally. It doesn't matter what your status is. It doesn't matter who you are. We see this in impeachment proceedings in the United States. I live in the great state of Illinois, where 3 of our last 7 governors have served jail time for things they did either in office or after they left office, or in one case before they got into office. All 3 of them were not immune from the law of the state of Illinois, and all 3 of them have served jail time. I think we're unique among the 50 states in the United States in having that high of a ratio of former governors serving jail time. Particularist idea is what is right is situationally dependent on a number of factors. If a very powerful person violates the law, that's okay, because that person is a person who's very powerful. And if they're the ones who determine the law, then they determine whether the law is to be followed or not. Dynamics of the relationship. I find it interesting how many people here in the States, which largely is universalist, yet still will make donations to local police societies when fundraising time come up, and make sure they prominently display the sticker on their window that they have given to a police cause, in the hopes that if they get pulled over for a traffic violation, they will not receive a citation because they have that on their car. Because they have a relationship through having given money to a fraternal order of police charity fundraising event or something like that. The possibility of exceptions being made. Even at places like Wheaton, exceptions, I have a policy in my classes, late assignments are 5 to 10% off. That's always at the discretion of the professor, and it always depends on the circumstances there and the reasoning. Most professors are more lenient with an excuse that's offered before the late date arrives than they are with the excuses given after the date has already passed. Because if you know in advance you won't be able to complete an assignment, and you at least ask permission, the professor, in my case, I say to myself, at least this person is thinking far enough in advance to know they're not going to be able to do the assignment. Is there space for grace? And typically there's more space for grace in situations like that. The time that it doesn't happen, or when the rules of the institution supersede the informal rules of the classroom, So it's just deadlines for grades for the course. Those are due at a certain deadline, so if a paper comes after that, I don't have a choice on how I handle the grading. And in part, the school used to be more flexible, but the federal government has made it hard to be more flexible with that. They crack down and they audit our courses and they say, are you giving the grades on time, and do they have a medical reason or other personal or family emergency that generated it, or was it sheer laziness on their part? And if you don't have any evidence one way or the other, it's deemed as you're not being consistent in your own policies, and that's not a good thing to be seen in a U.S. institution. And in particular, every violation should be treated uniquely because it's a unique set of circumstances for every violation. So when we think about approaching rules, what are the rules for in-group members versus non-in-group members? Those who have been victims of discrimination feel this on a regular basis. So at a place like Wheaton, which is a white suburb and historically has been a white institution, to be a white person means you're part of the in-group, even though Wheaton doesn't think of itself that way. So one of our faculty members who was in a mixed racial marriage had a biracial son, and so when they moved out to Wheaton so she could take up her post as a professor here, every 2 weeks he was a young, in this case biracial African-American white male driving an older car. Wheaton police pulled him over on average once every 2 weeks. Check his license, occasional spread eagle searches, put your hands on the car, and she wrote Wheaton police saying, you're profiling. They wrote back and said, no, we're not, but they stopped pulling him over. At the same time, a deeply embarrassing incident on Wheaton's campus was an African-American woman coming to be interviewed for a faculty position on campus. Her husband, who was also black, just decided he would go into the bookstore and look around. And he had an hour to waste while she's going through this interview process. He came out of the bookstore after an hour to find a Wheaton City Police and a campus security waiting for him because he was loitering in the bookstore. Deeply embarrassing for the institution, and they instituted immediately policy changes for training their bookstore employees. It was an employee who was suspicious. A Wheaton City Police member coincidentally happened to be on campus at the time, and so they decided they would come over. What kind of world is that says we treat all equally, but the reality is we don't? And it's part of where Wheaton has to learn how to grow up and has a long ways to go at this point in time. But when you're looking at Universalists versus Particularists, if my wife was being interviewed at Wheaton and I were to go into the bookstore and browse around for the hour, I wouldn't expect anything. That's because I'm a member of the in-group here. Even though I don't think that way, that's what racism does to us as well, to ethnocentrism.